Tesla and Ford both dropped their prices significantly, with Ford's Mustang Mach-E over $5,000 cheaper and Tesla's Model Y a full $13,000 cheaper. Why did these changes happen at the start of the new year? Simple. Certain parts of the Inflation Reduction Act took effect on January 1st, and among the many things the Inflation Reduction Act changes, qualifications for the EV tax credit were among the biggest changes. There are now limits on how expensive an electric car can be, how much you can earn, and you also only have until March to buy an EV. Why? Well, there's a lot to unpack, but I'll try my best to explain it as simply as possible. Hello people of the internet, I'm Nico, and I found some false information that established websites are reporting, which I'll cover later in the video. First, I'll explain why EV prices have dropped, then I'll cover the false information, and to finish the video, I'll explain why you should buy an EV before March, or if you're watching this later, why you should have bought an EV before March. First off, what caused prices to fluctuate in the past few months? Sometime last summer, for those of you watching in the future, I'm referring to the summer of 2022, various electric vehicles saw their prices increase due to a number of factors. There are some factors from before the summer of 2022, like supply chain issues and high gas prices, but more recently there was an increase in the cost of raw materials, something that would be in part due to the increased demand for those materials. This all changed recently though. In the span of a few weeks, prices dropped like a rock and then got readjusted. The Tesla Model 3 is now $500 cheaper, but conversely, the Model Y is $500 more expensive. These changes follow the prior changes where both models dropped by thousands of dollars. Other models have seen similar changes, with Chevrolet's Bolt and EUV having prices bumped up by under $1,000, also following drastic cuts a few months prior. So why? Why these price adjustments and the large drops specifically? I think it has to do with the Inflation Reduction Act and what is going to change in March. Firstly, there are many changes made to the EV tax credit, and one of those changes is a new limit on how expensive an EV can be to qualify for the tax credit. I cover all this in a previous video, you can check it out after this video, but what you need to know firstly is that in order to qualify for the tax credit, cars, so sedans, hatchbacks, whatever, all the smaller vehicles, can be no more than $55,000. For your larger vehicles, your SUVs, your vans, your pickup trucks, they can be no more than $80,000. So for the Model 3 to come down makes sense. Even the top of the range Model 3 performance is below the $55,000 limit with a little extra cushion, so even if you have a few options, the Model 3 is now eligible for the tax credit. However, the Model Y and the Mustang Mach-E did not need to. I say this in spite of what established journalistic websites like Car and Driver, Electrek, and Teslarati state. This is what I alluded to at the beginning of the video about major websites spreading false information, and now I get to prove it to you. Car and Driver, Electrek, and Teslarati all talk about the Tesla Model Y dropping price so that it can get below the $55,000 limit for electric cars, which is all well and good, except that the IRS themselves categorized the Tesla Model Y and the Mustang Mach-E to be under the $80,000 limit. Now, I can't judge too hard because if you've bothered to read the actual Inflation Reduction Act document, you know that it is more strenuous on the mind than reading Romeo and Juliet in Old English. But for me, it's pleasing that major websites make mistakes, which I can then catch. My gloating aside, the Tesla Model Y and the Mustang Mach-E did not need to drop prices to qualify for the tax credit, which begs the question, why drop the prices? My theory? I reckon it has to do with the changes that are coming in March, specifically some things that were not clarified by the IRS when the Inflation Reduction Act took effect. One of the most shocking changes to the EV tax credit were new assembly and sourcing requirements of EV parts, namely that they must be assembled in North America. Now, technically that requirement took effect when the Inflation Reduction Act was signed, but because the IRS didn't issue clarification of sourcing provisions, there is now a small window for buying an EV. When exactly the IRS plans to give us an update on the requirements for sourcing materials, I'm not sure, but if you're wondering what exactly the big deal is with these sourcing requirements, let me give you an idea of just how major this change is. Simply put, there is no electric vehicle on the market today that will qualify for the full tax credit. Not a single one. Now, That is not to say that they won't qualify at all. Maybe some get at most half of the $7,500, but after looking through the Inflation Reduction Act myself, I question if you would get much of any money for buying an EV unless manufacturers start to make some big changes. Just take a little look with me and bear in mind that I'm not a legal expert and that this will get updated further in March. But it states here in subsection God knows what that critical materials must be extracted or processed in the US or any nation the US has a free trade agreement with, which, as of now, does not include any European nations but includes Canada, Mexico, and Australia. This will likely make it tough for European car companies, which the EU has expressed concerns about, but never mind that because there's more to cover. Over the next few years, more and more of the critical materials and battery components must come from the US and countries with whom we have free trade agreements. It starts with 40% of the critical materials for vehicles placed in service before January 1st of 2024, and it increases by 10% every year after that until 2026. After 2026, it's capped at 80%. As for battery components, it's basically the same, it just starts at 50%, climbs up to 90% until 2028, and after 2028, all battery components must be sourced in the US or nations with whom we have free trade agreements. Yeah, it's horribly complicated, completely incomprehensible, and a major headache to car companies who would like to take advantage of the EV tax credit. So you may be wondering, what will EV prices look like after the Inflation Reduction Act gets some updates? Honestly, I don't know. I'm not from the future, sorry to disappoint you, but if I may speculate, I would guess that the prices are mostly based on production costs. Genius thinking, I know, but stay with me. So, if a company is having to heavily invest in moving their production and material sourcing here, then the prices of their EVs will likely go up. For companies who already assemble their electric cars here and only have to worry about sourcing requirements, I would imagine their prices wouldn't change drastically, but what do I know? I'm no expert on the economics of building electric cars. If you want to know all of the changes made to the EV tax credit, that video will pop up here in just a sec. Until next time, people of the internet, peace out.